The wind howled through the desolate field, carrying with it the scent of dust and abandonment. Emily stood in the distance, gazing at the lone horse, its coat matted and eyes wide with fear. The animal trembled in the harsh, unforgiving elements, a living embodiment of neglect. It was clear from its posture, hunched and cautious, that this horse had been left to die in the wilderness. Emily's heart broke as she observed the horse's struggle. The earth was cracked and dry beneath its hooves, and there was no sign of a caretaker, no sign of love. The horse had known nothing but pain and hunger for as long as it could remember. As it lifted its head, the poor creature could feel its strength failing. It looked around, desperate for any sign of kindness, but all it saw was the barren land stretching out before it. There was no hope, no safety, only survival, and even that seemed impossible. In the distance, a faint rumble of thunder signaled the coming storm. For days, Emily had noticed the lone horse wandering aimlessly through the field, struggling to survive in the harsh conditions. Her heart ached each time she saw him. She couldn't understand how anyone could abandon such a creature. The horse's eyes seemed to call out for help, for a connection. Emily couldn't ignore the silent plea. As a kind-hearted girl of 16, she often found herself helping the animals in need around her home. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she couldn't stand by while this horse suffered. Determined to make a difference, Emily gathered some food and set out to find the horse, hoping that she could offer him the care and love he so desperately needed. As Emily approached, she moved with caution, not wanting to startle the horse. She whispered softly, hoping the creature could hear her words. "It's okay," she said. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." The horse hesitated, his head turning slightly toward her. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Emily felt a wave of connection. She could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else, a flicker of trust. The horse shifted its weight, as though considering whether or not to approach her. Emily stood still, holding the hay out in front of her, her heart pounding with hope that the horse would take the first step. The horse took a cautious step forward, its hooves making a soft sound against the dry earth. Emily held her breath, afraid to move too suddenly. Slowly, the horse took another step, then another, until it was standing just in front of her. She could feel the warmth of its body, the heat from its weary frame. She carefully placed the hay on the ground, keeping her movements slow and gentle. The horse hesitated, sniffing the hay, before lowering its head and taking a bite. Emily smiled, feeling a surge of joy at this small victory. She sat down on the ground, her eyes never leaving the horse. "I'll stay with you," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." Over the next few days, Emily returned to the field, bringing more food for the horse each time. She could see that it was getting stronger, though still cautious. Emily spoke to him every time she visited, telling him about her life, about the family and animals she cared for. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Emily stood with the horse, her hand resting gently on his neck. The bond between them had grown stronger, and she could see that the horse was beginning to trust her. "I'll call you Storm," Emily said softly. "You've been through a storm, but you're here now, and I'll help you through the rest." The horse nickered in response, a small but significant sign of acceptance. Over the next few days, Emily returned to the field each afternoon, bringing food for the horse. She called him Storm, because of the fierce, yet gentle way he moved through the world. Every time she came, she saw his fear begin to fade, though he still held his distance. The bond between them slowly grew as they shared these quiet moments together. Emily spoke to him softly, telling him about her life and dreams, her words forming a bridge of trust. She could see the horse growing stronger, his coat becoming shinier, his movements more confident. The first time he had nickered at her, she had felt a wave of joy, realizing that he was beginning to trust her. Emily knew that there was a long way to go, but each visit felt like a victory. She smiled to herself, feeling that she was making a difference. Slowly, but surely, they were becoming friends. As the days passed, Emily noticed that Storm had begun to approach her more willingly. He would look at her with curious eyes, occasionally stepping closer. On one particular afternoon, Emily was sitting on a small stone near the edge of the field when the horse came right up to her, his ears forward in curiosity. Emily froze for a moment, not daring to move, afraid of scaring him away. But instead of shying away, the horse sniffed her hand. Emily felt a rush of excitement, but kept her movements slow and steady. She gently placed the hay on the ground, watching as Storm bent down to eat it, his body language more relaxed than it had been before. Emily let out a quiet sigh of relief, realizing that this small step was the beginning of a deeper connection between them. In the following days, their interactions grew more frequent. Storm would come closer each time Emily visited, sometimes even allowing her to touch his coat, though briefly. There was still much hesitation in his movements, but Emily could feel the progress. She spoke to him often, her voice soft and steady, as if soothing both him and herself. "I know it's hard, Storm," she would say. "But you're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Slowly, the fear in his eyes began to fade. He started to follow her, even if it was just a few steps at a time. Emily was beginning to realize that this wasn't just about helping a horse. It was about healing both of them. Her own wounds, those of abandonment and loneliness, seemed to soften as she spent time with Storm. She could see him healing, and in turn, so was she. Weeks passed, and the bond between Emily and Storm grew deeper. She continued to visit every day, always bringing food, always speaking softly to him. One afternoon, as Emily sat on the stone near the field's edge, she watched as Storm grazed nearby. His coat was no longer as matted, and his steps were steady. He was stronger, more at ease. Emily smiled to herself, a feeling of accomplishment settling in her chest. She had done this. She had helped him. The connection between them had become undeniable. As she stood and walked toward him, Emily felt a sense of pride, not just in how far Storm had come, but in herself as well. She had given both of them something precious, trust and hope. "I think you're ready," she whispered, knowing that, like her, Storm was finding a new beginning. One evening, after several weeks of steady progress, Emily brought an extra treat for Storm. She reached into the bag and pulled out a shiny red apple, holding it out in front of him. At first, he hesitated, his ears flicking back in uncertainty. But then he cautiously took a step forward, his large, gentle eyes locking with hers. With a soft nicker, he reached out and gently took the apple from her hand. Emily's heart swelled with joy as she watched the horse eat the apple, the final symbol of his trust in her. "Thank you, Storm," she whispered softly. "You've made me so proud." In that moment, Emily knew that their bond was no longer just about saving him. It was about saving each other. It had been weeks since Emily began visiting Storm daily, and their bond had deepened. Yet, not everyone was happy about it. One afternoon, as Emily was walking toward the field, she noticed a man standing near the fence. His expression was stern, and his posture tense. As she got closer, he turned to face her. "What are you doing here with my horse?" he asked, his voice sharp and accusing. Emily paused, taken aback by the question. She had never seen this man before, but something about him felt wrong. "Your horse?" she asked, her voice trembling with confusion. The man's eyes narrowed as he looked at Storm, who was grazing a few feet away. "That's my property," he said with an unsettling calmness. Emily felt a surge of protectiveness for Storm. She had spent weeks caring for him, and this man seemed to be nothing but trouble. The tension in the air thickened as the man took a step closer. The man's claim sent a cold shiver down Emily's spine. She stood her ground, her heart pounding. "He's not your horse," she said firmly, trying to steady her voice. "I've been taking care of him for weeks." The man's lips curled into a tight, angry smile. "And I've been looking for him," he snapped. "He's mine, and you have no right to take him." Emily was shocked by the cruelty in his voice. She could feel the horse's eyes on her, but she didn't dare look away from the man. "Storm doesn't belong to anyone who would leave him out here to starve," she shot back, her voice rising. "I've been the one who's cared for him, and I'm not letting you take him." The man stepped forward, his hand raised in a threatening manner. "I don't care what you think," he snarled. "Give him to me, or there will be consequences." The man's words hung in the air like a threat. Emily stepped back, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not giving him to you," she said, her voice more confident this time. The man's face twisted in fury as he grabbed the fence post, his knuckles white. "You're making a big mistake," he warned, his voice low and menacing. Emily's heart raced, but she refused to back down. Storm's safety was at stake, and she couldn't let him fall back into the hands of this cruel man. She glanced over at Storm, who was still grazing, but now standing slightly apart, his body tense. Emily felt a sense of urgency. She couldn't let this man take Storm. She knew she had to act fast. "I'll call the authorities," Emily said boldly, pulling her phone out. "You're not getting him." The man's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't move forward. Instead, he glared at Emily, seething. The man scoffed and turned away, but Emily could still see the fury in his eyes. He muttered something under his breath, but Emily couldn't make out the words. She didn't care. She'd won this round. But she knew this wouldn't be over. The man would try again, and next time, he might not be so easy to stop. As the man walked off, Emily stayed rooted to the spot, her heart still pounding in her chest. Storm slowly trotted over to her, his ears flicking back and forth, sensing the anxiety in the air. Emily knelt down and stroked his mane, trying to calm both herself and the horse. "It's okay, boy," she whispered softly. "We'll be okay." But even as she spoke, a nagging feeling lingered in the pit of her stomach. This was just the beginning, and Emily feared the worst was yet to come. For days, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man's threat hung over her like a cloud. She continued to visit Storm, but every time she stepped into the field, she half expected the man to be there, watching her from afar. On the fourth day after the confrontation, Emily was once again walking toward the field when she noticed something different. There was a truck parked near the edge of the property, its engine running. Her stomach dropped. She recognized the vehicle. It was the man's. Emily froze, her mind racing. She had to act quickly. She glanced over at Storm, who was grazing in the field, unaware of the approaching danger. Emily pulled her phone out again, dialing for help, her heart pounding in her chest. This time she wouldn't be caught off guard. The truck remained parked near the field for what felt like an eternity. Emily's pulse raced as she stood at the edge of the field, watching the vehicle carefully. Her thoughts spiraled. What was the man planning? Was he going to try and take Storm again? Her mind was clouded with questions, but she didn't have time for answers. Her first priority was protecting Storm. Emily slowly stepped forward, keeping her body low, hoping that the man hadn't seen her yet. As she approached the truck, she noticed something unexpected. A set of papers, a stack of documents partially visible through the truck's open window. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was at that moment that the realization hit her. This wasn't just a random encounter. These papers could be the key to everything. The man wasn't just after the horse. There was something else going on. She needed to get closer. Emily's heart raced as she slowly crept closer to the truck, her eyes fixed on the stack of papers. She knew she shouldn't get too close, but the need to understand what was going on overpowered her fear. She had no idea what was written on those papers, but they could hold the answers she desperately needed. When she reached the truck, she took a deep breath and snuck around to the driver's side. She peered through the window and saw the documents spread across the seat. As she leaned in, she could just make out some words: ownership, abandonment, and settlement. Before she could read more, a voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. "What do you think you're doing?" The man's voice was cold and sharp. Emily's heart sank, but she didn't back away. She had to confront him now before he could leave with Storm. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she turned around, facing the man. He was standing only a few feet away, his expression dark and menacing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and threatening. Emily stood her ground, refusing to let fear control her. "This is my horse now," she replied firmly, her voice unwavering. "I don't care what papers you have. I've been the one taking care of him." The man's eyes narrowed as he moved closer, but Emily didn't back away. "You think those papers will save you?" he sneered. "You're about to learn the truth about that horse." Emily's stomach dropped at the words. What was he talking about? Was there more to Storm's story than she had been told? She had to find out. But before she could speak, the man reached into the truck and grabbed the papers, holding them out in front of her. "Take a look for yourself," he said coldly. Emily took the papers from the man, her hands shaking slightly. She quickly scanned the documents, her eyes widening as she read the words. The papers detailed Storm's previous life, a life that Emily had never known about. The man was not his owner, but rather a distant relative who had abandoned him after a series of legal battles over the horse's care. The papers also revealed that Storm had once been part of a prestigious racehorse lineage, but after a career-ending injury he had been cast aside. Emily felt a wave of anger and disbelief. How could anyone treat an animal like this? The man stood there, watching her read, as though waiting for her to come to some realization. Emily's heart raced as she processed the information. She now knew the truth. Storm wasn't just a random horse she had saved. He had a history, and a painful one at that. And this man was responsible for much of the pain Storm had endured. The man watched Emily closely, his expression unreadable. "You've made your choice," he said, his voice flat. Emily looked up from the papers, her heart pounding. "I'm not giving him back," she said firmly, holding the documents out toward him. "He's not your property, not anymore." The man's lips tightened, and for a moment, Emily thought he might lash out. But instead, he turned away and climbed into the truck. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice full of venom. "You don't know what you're up against." As the truck roared to life and drove away, Emily stood frozen in the field, staring after him. The truth had been revealed, but Emily knew this was far from over. Storm was hers now, but the battle was just beginning. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Emily had seen the man drive past the field a few times, his truck always slow and deliberate, as though he was watching her. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something. One afternoon, as Emily approached the field, she saw a figure standing near the fence. It was him. The man had returned, and this time he wasn't alone. Beside him, Emily noticed two other men, both dressed in heavy jackets and carrying ropes. Emily's stomach dropped as she realized what was happening. The man wasn't just going to walk away, he was here to take Storm by force. Panic surged through her, but she knew she had to stay calm. Emily had to think quickly if she was going to protect Storm. "Get back!" she called, her voice shaking but firm. "Stay away from him." The men ignored Emily's command and began to move towards Storm. She could feel her heart racing, but she couldn't afford to be afraid. "I said stay back," Emily shouted again, her voice breaking through the tension. She ran toward the horse, her legs burning with urgency. Storm looked up at her, sensing her panic, and began to move, his body tense. The man who had first claimed Storm smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "He's mine," he said, his voice dripping with authority. "I'll take him back whether you like it or not." Emily could feel the weight of his words, but she wasn't backing down. She reached Storm just as the men began to approach. She held out her hands to him, trying to steady herself and the horse. "It's okay, Storm," she whispered, trying to calm him. As the men closed in, Emily reached Storm's side, her hands resting on his neck. The horse tensed under her touch, but she could feel his trust in her. "You're not taking him," Emily said fiercely, her voice gaining strength. The man sneered. "You can't stop me, little girl," he spat. His hand shot out to grab Emily's arm, but before he could, Storm reared up, his hooves striking the air. Emily jumped back, barely avoiding the powerful animal. She could hear the man curse under his breath as he stumbled backward, trying to regain control. Emily stood her ground, her face filled with defiance as she shouted, "Stay away from him!" The other two men hesitated, unsure of how to proceed as Storm continued to stand between them and Emily. The standoff between Emily and the men continued, each second feeling like an eternity. Emily knew she couldn't hold them off forever. Her only chance was to keep them distracted long enough for help to arrive. As she stood firm, she noticed the men beginning to circle around her, their eyes narrowing with frustration. Emily's breath was shallow, and she could feel her legs trembling. She looked around the field desperately, hoping for any sign of someone who could help. Just then, a sound in the distance caught her attention, the roar of an approaching engine. Emily turned to see a truck barreling down the dirt road, kicking up dust behind it. The men paused, their attention diverted. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This could be her chance. The truck skidded to a halt, and the door swung open. A familiar face appeared. The local sheriff, Officer Hall, stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. "What's going on here?" he called, his voice commanding. The men froze, their hands still gripping the ropes. Emily felt a rush of relief, but she didn't let her guard down. "These men are trying to take my horse," she explained quickly, pointing to the papers in her hands. The sheriff's eyes flicked over to the man with the scruffy beard. "Is that so?" he asked coldly. The man remained silent, but the tension was palpable. Emily stepped forward, holding the documents out to Officer Hall. "This horse is mine now. He's been abandoned, and I've been caring for him." The sheriff nodded, his eyes narrowing as he looked over the papers. "I think it's time we sorted this out," he said firmly. The men, realizing they had no legal ground, backed away slowly. Days passed since the sheriff intervened. Emily's life with Storm had returned to normal, but the weight of the man's attempt to take Storm lingered in her mind. Emily knew that this wasn't just about ownership. It was about survival. She spent every day with Storm, watching him grow stronger and more confident. The bond between them deepened each passing day. But Emily knew it wasn't over yet. The man had made it clear he wouldn't give up. As Emily stood beside Storm, she resolved to protect him, no matter the cost. A week later, Emily received a call from the sheriff's office. The man who had tried to take Storm was pressing charges against her, claiming that she had stolen the horse. Emily couldn't believe it. She had the legal documents, the support of the sheriff, and yet the man was still determined to take Storm back. Emily was afraid, but she didn't let fear control her. She would fight not just for Storm, but for everything they had built together. The thought of losing him tore her apart, but she wouldn't give up. The next few days were filled with anxiety. Emily spent hours organizing her documents, making sure everything was in order. She went to the courthouse with the sheriff, hoping the legal process would be quick. But as the days dragged on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching her. He hadn't given up, and neither would she. The thought of losing Storm felt unbearable. Emily looked over at the horse, who stood by the fence watching her. The bond between them had grown deeper than she could have ever imagined. A week later, the day of the hearing arrived. Emily stood in front of the judge, documents in hand, with the sheriff by her side. The man had made his case, but Emily was resolute. She explained everything from the day she found Storm to the bond they shared. She spoke about how she had cared for him, and how he had become a part of her life. When the judge finally made his decision, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. The judge ruled in her favor, granting her full custody of Storm. When the judge's gavel struck, Emily felt a wave of emotions wash over her. She had won. Storm was finally hers, and she could breathe easier knowing he was safe. The man who had tried to take him was no longer a threat. As Emily left the courthouse, she couldn't wait to return to the field, to be with Storm. That night, she stood beside him, her hand gently resting on his neck. "We made it, boy," she whispered. "We're home now." Emily smiled, knowing that the road ahead might still be tough, but with Storm by her side, they could face anything together. Several months passed since the court decision, and Emily and Storm had settled into a new routine. The bond they shared was stronger than ever. One afternoon, as they were walking through the field, Emily heard a familiar sound, the sound of hooves approaching. She turned to see a familiar truck driving down the dirt road. It was Officer Hall, and he had a big smile on his face. "I just wanted to see how you both were doing," he said with a chuckle. Emily smiled, her heart warmed by the visit. The visit from Officer Hall was a reminder of how far they had come. Emily now spent her days with Storm, no longer fearing for his safety. She had created a life for them both, one filled with stability and love. As the days passed, they often spent hours together in the field, with Emily walking alongside Storm, talking to him as if he were a friend she'd had forever. She'd never thought she'd find such peace, but now, it felt like everything was falling into place. One evening, as Emily sat on the porch of her house, looking out over the field, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Everything had changed. She had fought for Storm, and in doing so, she had also found herself. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by the joy of knowing she had given Storm a second chance at life. As she looked out over the field, Emily could see Storm grazing in the distance, free and at peace. They both were. As the months passed, Emily continued to grow with Storm by her side. They became inseparable. When the world seemed uncertain, she always had Storm to turn to. The bond they had created was unbreakable, and they faced life together, stronger than ever. One day, as Emily stood by the fence, watching Storm run freely through the field, she smiled. This was the life she had always dreamed of, and she knew it was only the beginning of their new journey together. On one last evening, Emily stood on the hill, overlooking the field. Storm stood beside her, his head resting against her shoulder. It had been a long journey, but now they were finally home. Emily knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in both of their lives. Together, they had overcome so much, and they were stronger for it. She turned to look at Storm, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep, unshakable peace. "We made it," she whispered.